Who has the next question for Dr. Avalos? Go ahead.
Dr. Avalos, Dr. Craig pointed out that if one does not believe miracles are even possible, then he or she can only interpret the biblical documents as being made up. That just immediately follows. And then he pointed out how your empirical rationalistic epistemology or theory of knowledge, basically your worldview through which you interpret everything, including the biblical documents, does not allow for the possibility of knowledge in any other way. He pointed out how empirical rationalism is self-defeating. You would say it's self-affirming, but it affirms that it's self-defeating. And you never really dealt with his point that you can use rationality, reason, to point out bad reason, just like you can use good logic to point out bad logic. You never really responded to that. Do you have anything to kind of follow up on that?
I thought I did very well, in that his rationale could not distinguish between the historicity of Matthew 27, 52, and 53 from the historicity of Mark 16. So how is his rationale helping you establish history? Secondly, I don't think you can defeat empirical rationalism with empirical rationalism.
That statement doesn't make sense.
Well, by using logic, you're using rationalism. By pointing to facts, you're using empiricism. So you're affirming the very thing you're trying to deny. You can't do it. You have to use something else to defeat empirical rationalism. And the third point is, I was trying to show Dr. Craig is a naturalist. He's just a relativistic naturalist because he applies naturalism to stories he does not favor. He a priori would exclude because of his theology. For example, any claims made by any other god, he doesn't believe in other gods. So he couldn't possibly take seriously the historical claims made on behalf of other gods. So he's a priori excluding other things. He's a priori excluding apocalypticism sometimes from historicity. There's all kinds of exclusions going on his side.
Okay, could we have the next questioner from this side?
Yes, my question is based on why there was a burden of proof on Dr. Avalos. We've seen throughout history that when a person dies and you dig up the body, there are bones there. If I die in 50 years, my bones will be there. It's the wild claim, and I mean no disrespect in saying that, of course. It's the claim that goes against the norm that generally needs a burden of proof. Why does Dr. Avalos need to prove that things happen normally as they always have since and did before, versus you proving that things happen supernaturally?
Yeah. Well, you've offered an argument. I mean, and that was more than he did. So that's a good argument to raise. You're saying the laws of nature exclude this, and so it must be false. And then we would have to argue about that. What I said was that the belief that God raised Jesus from the dead doesn't contradict science. It doesn't contradict any natural law, because those only describe what happens naturally. And I agree that it's naturally impossible for people to rise again from the dead. I wholeheartedly endorse that. But what I suggest is that the hypothesis God raised Jesus from the dead is not unacceptably ad hoc, and I do have independent reasons for believing that God exists, so I have these explanatory resources in my worldview, and so I think it's legitimate to appeal to them. Let me say as well, too, that your argument wouldn't do anything to dispute the facts of the case, things like the burial, the empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances. Those are just historical facts. What your argument would be against would be the best explanation for them. You would concede the facts, but just say you can never adopt a supernatural explanation. But I think that's an arbitrary restriction. It's an attempt to say that the pool of live options for an explanation is going to be limited to naturalistic explanations. And if you do that, well, then I'll agree with you that some naturalistic explanation is the best explanation that's naturalistic. But that's not the question. We want to know what is the best explanation overall, including in the pool of live options a possible supernatural explanation. Dr. Avalos has said he's willing to let that be in the pool of live options. His objection wasn't like yours. He was saying that we can't infer the resurrection because we can only appeal to known causes. But I gave counterexamples to that, tried to explain how that would impede science, and then also that I do have grounds for thinking that I do know God exists. So that's why I think it's legitimate to infer in this case the resurrection.